Mally was a very likeable and loving child, with a sense of mischief and fun which remained throughout his life. Mally attended Llanigan Primary School. His friend Paul remembers him taking flowers in regularly for his favourite teacher, thanks in the main to his green-fingered mum. And then he went on to Gwynedd High School, and his science teacher again said, "I recall all the fun, laughter and cause for thought he's given me, and how he added to many lessons which would have been pathetically dull without him." Mally particularly enjoyed drama at school and any opportunity to dress up. The dramatic life continued during his Young Farmers Club days and beyond. Mally was a real countryman, pursuing grey squirrels with his dog Sweep. Mally became an ace marksman, going on to win an air gun in a national competition. And then, following in the tyre tracks of his brothers, Mally became an expert dirt biker and mechanic to anything. Brynglesi would hum to the sound of bikes and laughter and was open house to anyone who shared his passions. On leaving school, Mally went on to work on the family farm with Fred and Nancy. At the same time, Mally was able to pursue main interest, which was for music. He learned guitar and started to write music and lyrics, and he started up a duo with school friend Wiggy, and they performed locally. At the age of 20, Mally decided to concentrate on his musical career by moving to Cardiff, and then on to London in 1988, seeking fame and fortune in the smoke. The day jobs varied from scaffolding, building work, pinball and fruit machine engineering. And getting around London, his motorcycling skills were to prove invaluable. In the evenings with musical friends, he set up his bands, Zip Zip, and aided Wiggy with his band, Bikini Beach, as their heckling compere. They roamed the music venues of the capital city and had an entourage of devoted fans. In June '93, for one night only, Zip Zip took Hay by storm, and Mally's entertainment credentials were well proclaimed in his hometown. He was pleased to get good reviews in the Melody Maker and to be acclaimed in the Stoke Newington music scene. And I think some of Mally's music can be seen on Facebook. In 2001, Mally returned to his roots at Brynglesi, much to the delight of Fred and Nancy and the joy of his many friends. Mally soon got back into the groove of country life, at the same time keeping his links with London alive, and with many visitors sampling Welsh cakes and many welcomes in the hillsides. Mally would often regale us with exciting accounts of his experiences and exploits while in London. He could always be relied upon to be entertaining and have us all in stitches, telling jokes and anecdotes which always had his unique spin on them. There was never a dull moment around Mally. Back at Brynglesi, he was able to continue with his passion for music, building his own studio and setting up Super Pumped and making an album. He was also keen to support and encourage others to engage in developing their musical talents. The farm and the valley rocked on practice nights, and many of us will remember his skills as a singer, writer, guitarist and band leader at local gigs. Amongst his proteges was his niece Lisa, who, thanks to his encouragement, is following in Mally's musical footsteps. On his return to the farm, Mally also revisited with a passion his love of two-stroke dirt bikes. Taking part in many competitions, he spent many a happy hour slaving over a hot bike with his nephew Sean or some other bike-mad young person. Mally helped his lifelong friend Simon with his bike track on the adjoining farm, a much-loved resource by young bikers. Mally had the expertise to strip down and rebuild these beasts to high performance levels. This made him even more friends in the sport, and many a visitor would arrive with an ailing engine. While seriously ill, Mally won a trophy, and his pleasure was so apparent it was a joy to behold. He really enjoyed sharing the film that Rob and Rose had made of that event. Mally loved nothing more than making friends and joining in the fun. He was a natural entertainer, comic and wit. He could even be funny when he was really, really cross on the odd occasion. On so many occasions, his unique sense of humour shone through. Mally was a masterful mimic of Alan Partridge, and in recent years, the dry wit Ed Reardon gave him much pleasure. Everyone here today must have a favourite Mally joke, and maybe we should have a Mally Powell joke book. Mally, of course, also had a serious side and would help and advise wherever he could. Where he could, he would champion the vulnerable and would give good advice where he found injustice. Mally was a serious and caring hill farmer who was a real guardian of the countryside and to sharing it with all comers. He took Brynglessie into the organic scheme and really did like his sheep, despite telling Chrissy of a drastic cure to Phil Glatz. He nurtured his animals and doted on his trusty dogs. Mally coped with the mountains of paperwork that go with farming today, only thanks to the sterling help of friends and neighbours, Rachel and Chris. He became an active member of the Farmers' Union of Wales. As an unconfirmed bachelor, Mally had a series of long-term girlfriends, but never ended up tying the knot. Mally enjoyed being in love and old-fashionedly faithful. Many of his exes remained good friends. Not having children himself, Mally delighted in other people's and was a doting uncle, great-uncle and godfather. Children and young people found him fun to be around and relished seeing him. It wasn't all music, bikes and farming. Mally had many interests and was particularly fascinated and knowledgeable about Roman and military histories. He was interested in just about everything, science and mechanics and how things work. He was keen to try his hand at problem solving and constructed his own solar heating pipes. He designed and made a shepherd's hut for his friend Sally and could turn his hand to most things practical. In 2007, Fred, Mally, family and friends experienced the huge loss of Nancy and having to carry on without her. Then, in 2011, Mally was diagnosed with late-stage throat cancer, and his prognosis was very poor. The doctors in London thought he might only have 3 weeks left. Fortunately, as living in Wales, Mally was referred to inspiring NHS cancer teams in Cardiff at the Heath and Velindre. They offered him options which gave him more time. This was not without cost and suffering to Mally and his carers. Mally's bravery, inner strength and positive attitude kept him with us and in control of his life for 2.5 years. During this extra time, Mally completed projects on the farm, restored the tractors, fronting 2 or 3 super pumped gigs, won a dirt bike trophy, ran the farm, directed and acted in a music video. He had a ballad written about him. He watched all of the episodes of Breaking Bad, saw Alan Partridge, Alpha Papa the movie, flew twice over the Black Mountains in a glider and a gyrocopter. Mally spent a lot of time with his mates and catching up with the old ones. This resilience surprised even his clinicians and all those close to him. Mally, with the support of his 3 sisters, 2 of whom trained as nurses, the NHS teams at the Cardiff hospitals, Bronckley's community mental health team, Haygarth surgery, Macmillan workers, family neighbours, friends, Mally was able to end his days at Brindisi. There are people that you meet in life that you just know have a good heart and are honest and caring to the core. Mally was one of them. But even in that sadly small group of people, Mally stood out. His delightful and special angle on life, his wonderful brand of humour, always made him a delight to be around. This blend of character, driven by a good and honest heart, touched everyone who knew him. And for this, he will always be remembered. Even in the tough times of his illness, he was always very concerned about others and the distress his illness would cause the people around him. A mark of a very special man.
Mally's family have asked me to speak a little about his time in London. As most of you are aware, he spent, I was just recalculating there actually, I think it must have been about 13 years or so in the Hackney borough of Stoke Newington. In that time, he made an enormous number of friends, many of whom are here today. This was an important part of his life that many in Hay may not know so much about. So I want to tell you about Malcolm Powell, the singer and performer, and my friend Mally. I first met Mally along with his then bandmate Roger at an independent music business party in North London. Amongst all the cool people, there was Mally, immediately striking, with thick black hair down to the waist and a cowboy film baddie moustache. And his greeting to me of, "Hey, you got a Henry's calf too?" was so animated that I thought he was under the influence of strong stimulants. In fact, I'm pretty sure my first words to Mally were, "Are you on acid?" Which of course he wasn't, just high on life, bursting with energy and enthusiasm, because back then for Mally everything was beautiful. I'd just returned to Stoke Newington after spending several years away travelling, and meeting Mally and Roger that night, though I didn't yet know it, was the start of a whole new phase in my life. And I met so many good friends through Mal, like Paul, Jake, Gus, Michelle, Hal, and of course Wiggy, who himself has been a friend and colleague of mine in the beach now for 17 years. Wherever we went, Mally seemed to know everyone. His relentless sociability meant that even walking the half mile or so of Stoke Newington Church Street in his company could take hours, stopping every few yards to greet another acquaintance, often leaving them bemused and speechless. Such was the impact of the force of nature that was Mally. At that time, Mally's band was Zip Zip Undo Me, a bizarre blend of punk, disco and carry-on comedy, all dressed up in fetish clothing. The first time I saw Mal on stage, I was blown away. He was incredible. Amazing voice, amazing body, absolute confidence and lightning-quick humour. We loved them for their irreverence and total disregard of the zeitgeist, which at the time was all about shoegazing and taking oneself very seriously. So to suddenly find oneself watching the Zippers, with Mally dressed in fishnets and a tiger tail, leaping about the stage, urging the audience to mind their plums, it was the perfect antidote to the anti-entertainment stance of most bands at the time. Their audience actually included many off-duty record company employees and music journalists, but no one actually took the plunge, nailed their fishnets to the mask, and actually signed them, meaning that zippers remained firmly in cult corner. For a time, Mally and I were simultaneously unemployed, and we whiled away many an afternoon in the cafes and parks of Hackney, or tinkering with cars or motorbikes, drinking tea and laughing, always laughing. I remember on days we were accompanied by Paul or Jeff, someone likening us to the trio of characters from The Last of the Summer Wine, with Mally taking the role of Compo, if only because of his farmer's habit of occasionally closing his coat with a belt of sisal string, which was quite a fashion statement in Hackney. Mally was always full of contradictions that challenged one's unconscious prejudices and broke out of stereotypes. I had never met a farmer in the music scene before, let alone a hill farmer with such outrageous fashion sense. One never knew if Mal would look up showing fabulous in leather and furs, or, as I think some of his many gay friends may have preferred, in a ripped t-shirt covered in engine oil and bike chains. He could do camp, he could do showbiz, but he could also fix a tractor, ride bareback and herd sheep. In one legendary incident, he also showed us how to deal with bullies, dispatching two of them in short order and suddenly resembling David Carradine in the 1970s TV show Kung Fu. I was proud to know him, I was proud to be seen with him, and proud to call him my friend. Around 2 years ago, when I first heard about his illness, I, like everyone around him, was concerned that he'd get medical attention as soon as possible. And I want to thank Mally's great friends Fran and Dave for everything they did for him, stepping in to ensure that he got the best treatment, as Mally rarely, if ever, seemed to listen to anyone else. I also want to thank Mal's sisters Lydia and Chrissy and Dad Fred, not only for giving Mal such wonderful care in the last years, but also for making us and the constant stream of visitors from Hay, London and elsewhere feel so welcome and so comfortable. Like all creative eccentrics, Mal was unpredictable, sometimes volatile and occasionally difficult. But the strangest thing about his last 2 years is that his occasional bouts of negativity seemed to disappear, and his wonderful, positive and loving side took over for the ride to the finish. Whilst we will all inevitably be sad for our loss, I know Mally's message will be a positive one. To enjoy and appreciate our lives and friendships as much as we can, whenever we can, and be thankful for them and for our brief tenure on this earth. And so it's time for me to say goodbye, Mal. It was beautiful knowing you, and I know there will be never be another one like you.
Jeff, yet another one from London, who someone asked me, he seemed very upset. Can you tell me about Mally? They didn't know him, and I was paused. I thought, where do you start? And once you start, where do you end? A bit like Gibbo, who just spoke. When I first saw him in Stoke Newington, he was like a sort of Robert De Niro figure with a dash of the Mexican gypsy and a truly unique dress sense. And he, again at Henry's Cafe, which I lived next to, used to hold court. And it was before cappuccino had become a sort of taken over the whole of N16. I think he always ate bacon, egg and chips, religiously as it were. And then all these strange and dubious souls would gather round him with the most extraordinary conversations going on. And of course, when I first saw him perform, I was absolutely amazed. And what was absolutely joyful was looking at the audience, who were just grinning like a sea of Cheshire cats, really. But as a work colleague, now, he was a very interesting work colleague. Dave and Fran, who mentioned earlier, we had the Pinball Machine Company, which was a band of very diverse souls indeed, and it was best to leave one's sense of normality by the door as one entered. It was a bit like a sort of semi-psychotic soap opera masquerading as a place of work, with Mally very much as one of the main characters. Anecdotes of Mally at work, it was a constant thing. It was like, can you tell me a story? Well, there's been several in the last hour. Where do I start? I think being held up at gunpoint by an armed police response unit did stand out. We'd come back in the van from somewhere having a bizarre conversation, and I was saying, it's amazing, there's actually no traffic in Islington, it's absolutely dead, isn't that incredible? At which point a helicopter landed and armed police came out. We held up at gunpoint, they thought we were terrorists. As there's a guy with earrings and a guy with long black hair, we meant to planting bombs somewhere, just in a big van with flipping magic. And when they said, where are you off to? He said, Stoke Newington Police Station, which we were, with the pinball machine in the back. And another one that really stands out, we used to have work dinners, as it were, which were always very interesting. And I remember sitting in a restaurant and I recounted some not terribly amusing little anecdote, but it seemed to hit a funny bone with Mally, and he started laughing and we sort of joined in, and then couldn't stop. And it sort of spread like a disease throughout the restaurant, and the sort of waiters holding each other up, sort of chairs chipping backwards, food falling on the floor. Absolutely surreal. It was absolutely hysterical, literally. And it took hours to calm down. I still haven't fully recovered. This was several years ago, actually. Apart from being amusing, he was very resourceful. He didn't really want to waste time and money on spares. And when a pinball machine broke down, I'd be looking up part numbers. He had a very chaotic but sort of functional toolbox. He produced parts of an old tractor, a tin can and a rubber band, and fashioned something that would actually work surprisingly well and got us out of a lot of trouble. And working with him as well, customers have absolutely loved him and were mildly peeved if we turned up without him, partly because of his extraordinary conversation and witty repartee and just the bizarreness of his charming being, but also his terrifying renditions of his fellow workers. I remember someone doing an impersonation of him doing an impersonation of me, and it was so on the board and so terrifying I could hardly leave the house for several days. He could really mimic people, noting in bizarre detail every little foible and mannerism. Not that he was without his own little ways. I presume you might have noted a few mild eccentricities about him, the unusual food fads, the charmingly irrational rants on random topics, an ever-growing collection of bizarre semi-working motorcycles and strange four-wheel vehicles, many that had so many dials it would have put Concorde to shame, and engine parts made from margarine tubs, which really stuck in my mind. He was a very entertaining work colleague, never a dull moment, infuriating at times, but in a fantastic way. He was a very alive man, and you could not ignore how very tempting it was at times. He was also very kind and a caring friend, someone you could really laugh with and have absolutely magical adventures during a very, very normal day. Of course we will never forget him and his wonderfully bizarre ways, and whenever I shall think of him there'll be tears on my cheeks, but there's also be a smile on my face. But like Gibb, I was very touched by his extraordinary bravery near the end, the love of his family who really kept him going, and he was an extraordinary man to know, and I think I, like you, I'm very, very lucky to know him.
Good afternoon. For those who can see me inside, and for those, everybody outside who can't see me, and I know I've stood in some pretty cold tents, my name's Robbie Stan. And first off, I just wanted to say to the family, to Fred and to Lydia, to Chrissy, Tommy, Libby and Mervyn, to nephews and nieces, Rebecca, Sean, Sarah, Katie, Ellie, Nancy, Lisa, Morgan and Rowan, to great nephews and nieces, Edwin, Libby, Owen and Frankie. I'm genuinely sorry for your loss. I'm, as always, at occasions like this, feel both sort of sad and privileged to be standing here. In a way, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, and in a way, I'd rather be anywhere else. It's to be met with friends and family in this stunning, sacred place on this sublime Welsh hillside. My words this afternoon, and this is the last of the tributes, and I know it's getting cold out there, so stay with me. My words this afternoon have been shaped by 3 poems that Mally loved. Two of them by Edward Thomas that I read to him on a Sunday lunchtime just a few weeks ago, the last time that I saw him, and one by William Wordsworth, which he and Sarah, his niece, chose for today too. This is the poem that Mally and Sarah chose. I know it's meant a great deal to them both for quite some while. As I said, it's by William Wordsworth, and it's called Splendour in the Grass. What though the radiance which was once so bright be now forever taken from my sight? Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendour in the grass or glory in the flower, we will grieve not. Rather find strength in what remains behind, in the primal sympathy which having been must ever be, in the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering, in the faith that looks through death, in years that bring the philosophic mind. And those beautiful, beautiful phrases, the hour of splendour in the grass, years that bring the philosophic mind, they're both going to be themes that are going to run right through my eulogy for Mally. I've been lucky enough to be walking in the Black Mountains above this chapel since I was 17. And this past year, often as I came back down the mountain, I would make a much looked forward detour to the farm. If it was a weekend day, the farm would invariably be full of family and friends, local friends, friends from London, friends from afar, down for a big Sunday lunch round the table in the kitchen at Bringlessie. And latterly, Mally would receive visitors in the parlour. And the last time I saw Mally, I bought some poems which I thought he might like, and I read them out loud to him. Just the two of us, quietly, as the sounds of good conversation amongst his family and friends came from the kitchen next door. That afternoon, I hadn't originally intended to read this next poem that I'm about to share, but I did so on an impulse, and I decided to read a poem called Lob by Edward Thomas, a poet who was writing at the beginning of the 20th century and sadly died just 3 days before the armistice and the end of the First World War. And I loved the poetry of Edward Thomas since I was a teenager, and I've returned to his poems about the countryside, about love and regret, indeed about splendour in the grass and the philosophic mind, again and again, both in times of joy and in times of trouble and sadness throughout my own life. Lob is Thomas's longest poem, and it's about a figure who embodies the spirit of the British landscape, in its wildness, and its small, and its grand, and its pagan beauties. Lob is a figure who embodies its mythologies, its folklore, stories, dances and music, its humour and its mischief. Lob is mercurial, elusive, but always there, with a wild, almost pagan sense of fun and pleasure. And the figure of Lob appears through the centuries in many guises, under many names. As I was reading to Mally, I became filled with a sense which has grown and grown these past days, that I was reading a poem about Mally to Mally. Now, Lob's actually really quite a long poem, and I read the whole thing, and I think he enjoyed it. I wanted to give you a flavour of the rhythm and the narrative. So whilst this is only an excerpt, it's not a tiny excerpt. And with apologies to Edward Thomas, I've made one small change in the penultimate line. So this was a poem that I read to Mally just a few weeks ago. This is tall Tom that bore the logs in, and with Shakespeare in the hall once talked when icicles hung by the wall. At Herne the Hunter he's known hard times, when there were kings in Kent, this very Lob, whose sheep grew fat and he himself grew merry, wedded the king's daughter of Canterbury. For he alone, unlike squire, lord and king, watched a night by her without slumbering, he kept both waking. When he was but a lad, he won a rich man's heiress, deaf, dumb and sad. By rousing her to laugh at him, he carried his donkey on his back. So they were married. And while he was a little cobbler's boy, he tricked the giant coming to Shrewsbury to destroy Shrewsbury by flood. And how far is it yet? The giant asked in passing. I forget, but see these shoes I've worn out on the road, and we're not there yet. He emptied out his load of shoes for mending. The giant let fall from his spade the earth for damming 7, and thus made the Wrekin Hill, and little Pen-yr-Heol rose where the giant scraped his boots. Lob lie by the fire, Jack Cade, Jack Smith, Jack Moon, poor Jack of every trade, young Jack or old Jack, or Jack what ye will, Jack in the hedge or Robin run by the wall, Robin Hood, Ragged Robin, Lazy Bob, one of the lords of no man's land, good Lob, although he was seen dying at Waterloo, Hastings, Agincourt and Sedgemoor too, lives yet. He never will admit he's dead, till millers cease to grind men's bones for bread, not till our weathercock crows once again and I remove my house out of the lane onto the road. With this he disappeared, in hazel and thorn, tangled with old man's beard. But one glimpse of his back, as there he stood, choosing his way, proved him of old Jack's blood, young Jack perhaps, and now a Welshman, as he's oft been since his days began. Well, the small change is there in the penultimate line from Thomas's words, which were young Jack perhaps and now a Wiltshireman, to young Jack perhaps now and Welshman and now a Welshman. But I think that had he known Mally, had he met him, Edward Thomas, on one of his long roamings in Wales's green lanes, had they been able to have a beer, tell some tales together, I'm sure that Thomas would have heartily approved of the change. And Mally was indeed infused with a deep, deep sense of the spirit of place. The Romans called it genius loci. And as many of you know, Mally loved the Romans and Roman history, especially its connections with the landscape here. Indeed, he believed that Caractacus, that great scourge of the Romans, had a fort that you could have seen from the ridge in which the farm sits. And he had a hunch that Lanigan is so called after Caractacus' daughter, known as Igan by some historians. Genius loci, Mally Powell, spirit of the place indeed. His love of Roman history had been fed by the famous television series I, Claudius, the one broadcast in the 70s starring Derek Jacobi and John Hurt as a particularly bonkers Caligula. On one of my visits to the farm, Mally's old friends, Fran and Dave, were there with their daughters Leah and their eldest Ali, who was about to go to Trinity College, Oxford, to study Greats. Mally was so thrilled for her that afternoon that she should be about to become part of such a fantastic tradition of Latin and Greek studies at such a historic university. Mally had long encouraged her interest in things Roman, and in the past few days, Ali mailed me to say, one particular thing that springs to mind is his insistence that I watch I, Claudius before I started studying classics. He even sent me his much-watched copy of it in the post, and kept asking me if I'd seen it yet. Turns out that he really just wanted to giggle with me about one scene where John Hurt performs his Caligula dance. Perhaps this was the inspiration behind Mally's infamous dance moves. Now, I chose that anecdote in particular because it sums up Mally's lifetime enthusiasm that others should develop their passions, because it is laced with humour, because you can imagine his grin, which his friend Chainsaw said was his way of indicating that naughtiness was only seconds away. And because he was, in the words of Theo, a peerless performer, a merciless joke machine, and a faithful friend. He was a man who never stopped caring and being interested in the lives of everybody about him. And I'm sorry that I've not been able to include more of the amazing stories and anecdotes that friends have sent. But the family have organised an evening at the Globe at Hay, I believe, where there'll be a chance to tell more stories, make music, and no doubt tell Mally anecdotes deep into the night. Indeed, after the watershed might be a better time for two particularly fine anecdotes from his friend Dix, about a friend at school and winking, and about a fashion show involving rubber, latex, nipple clamps, a familiar little figure with long hair, high boots, a peephole bra on television, and a wife in labour. And I expect that that's probably the first and last time that peephole bars and nipple clamps are mentioned in this chapel. I did think, however, that this mail from his friend Fran was wonderful, and I hope she'll forgive me for paraphrasing it a little, but I wanted to share this too. And this is from his friend Fran. I was introduced to the beautiful being that was Mally. That's definitely Mally's sort of phrasing, at a party. The party was heaving, and then I heard this laugh, an amazing deep boom. There was also somehow a rising chuckle, and saw a resplendent, hairy Mally joking with my father like they'd been friends forever.
Mally joined the pinball machine company seamlessly. No interview necessary. I was especially impressed when he opened the bonnet of his car and showed me the filter he'd made out of a Vitalite tub and a sponge. For goodness knows. We'd found our man. Our time at the pinball company was wonderful. I wish I'd kept the answer phone tapes. We could have made a sitcom around those alone. Sometimes Manny would ring in with news of a collection or a purchase of which he was very proud, but be laughing so hard he couldn't actually say anything at all and had to call back several times before we understood. Then there were the monthly meetings, which were meant to be motivational and directional, but went rapidly off topic when Manny went through his Leonard Rossiter impersonation phase. So Alan Partridge and Leonard Rossiter too, and friends as well. Then meeting his family, his wonderful mum, his father whom he loved so much, having my own family. Manny was the first to try to come into the delivery room with flowers before Ali was properly born. Did he think I was lambing or what? And then my family was so fortunate to form friendships too with Chrissy. At first my youngest used to call Chrissy Girl Mally. And Lydia and Libby and the brothers, so lucky that they welcomed us. Mally was capable of being super smart, yet brilliant at playing the fool. He could converse at any level, walk into any room, and make himself at home. And his ethics, his own moral code, he had very high standards. We feel so blessed that Mally made so much time for our friendship. We felt special and proud to be in his company and feel his loss most profoundly. And thank you, Fran, for those, and thank you for sending them through to me. As I've got older, of all the qualities I've come to treasure in people, I think that humour and loyalty, kindness and curiosity are amongst those that I admire the most. And so I come to the third and last of the three poems. Again, this is one I read to Mally just a couple of weeks ago. And he specifically asked that this one should be read at his funeral. And this is by Edward Thomas too, and it's called Liberty. The last light has gone out of the world, except this moonlight lying on the grass like frost beyond the brink of the tall elm's shadow. It is as if everything else had slept many an age, unforgotten and lost. The men that were, the things done long ago, all I have thought, and but the moon and I live yet, and here stand idle over a grave where all is buried. Both have liberty to dream what we could do if we were free to do something we had desired long, the moon and I. There's none less free than who does nothing and has nothing else to do, being free only for what is not to his mind, and nothing is to his mind. If every hour like this one passing that I have spent among the wiser others, when I have forgot to wonder whether I was free or not, were piled before me and not lost behind, and I could take and carry them away, I should be rich. Or if I had the power to wipe out every one and not again regret, I should be rich to be so poor. And yet I am still half in love with pain, with what is imperfect, with both tears and mirth, with things that have an end, with life and earth, and this moon that leaves me dark within the door. So when I finished Liberty, Mally asked me to read it again, and then, as I say, asked me whether I thought that Thomas had known he was dying when he wrote this, as it spoke to much that he'd been reflecting on. And then he asked me to read it at his funeral, these words: or if I had the power to wipe out every one and not again regret, I should be rich to be so poor. And yet I am still half in love with pain, with what is imperfect, with both tears and mirth, with things that have an end, with life and earth, and this moon that leaves me dark within the door. Mally said in the last conversation I had with him that he had no regrets, that he'd loved and been loved, that he'd lived life to the full, and that when his mother Nancy had died, he'd come to the conclusion that love was a vibration that was everlasting, and that his mother's love for him and his for her was vibrating still in his heart. And I know that for all those who loved Mally, he will continue to vibrate in our hearts. and each and every one of us will, in turn, pass as our own part of our own legacy of love to family and friends, a part of the extraordinary, loving vibration that is Mally Powell. Thank you.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first began. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch